We're back with our panel. Peggy Noonan is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a CBS News contributor. Jamelle Bouie is the chief political correspondent for Slate magazine. Jeffrey Goldberg writes for The Atlantic. And Jonathan Martin covers politics for the New York Times. Welcome to all of you. Jonathan, let's start with you. Marco Rubio is trying to seize his moment, isn't he?
He sure is. He has had this promise for so long, John. And among political insiders, there was always the assumption that he would be a real contender in the end, but his poll numbers and his money didn't match. Well, now is the moment that that might actually change. Let's see where his numbers are this week in the polling. And obviously, his money is about to change because he got a big endorsement from Paul Singer, very prominent New York hedge funder, who I think will bring some money with him along the way. So Rubio now has an opportunity, and the question is, can he seize it? But what's so fascinating about this race, John, is, as you know, the assumptions have been almost uniformly incorrect along the way. So Ben Carson still leads in Iowa. Donald Trump doesn't seem to be going away. So while the sort of insider class thinks that Rubio is having his moment, and there's evidence that he is, the actual voters still seem to be very fond of the outsiders.
That's right. The Paul Singer moment, a big deal?
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, Sheldon Adelson is the big fish who hasn't been caught yet, although he's leaning Rubio.
But can fish write checks?
Fish can write checks with their gills, apparently.
He's the big fish because he can give a lot of money.
He can give huge sums of money. But Adelson is an army of one in a way. He's sort of an outlier. Paul Singer is connected into the Republican establishment, the hedge fund, Wall Street establishment, and his signaling. This is a signifier.
Right.
It's a moment where everybody's saying, oh, okay, Paul Singer thinks this is a good investment, and therefore it becomes a reality that it becomes a good investment.
Right. Exactly. Peggy, what did you make of the sort of Game of Thrones moment during the debate when Jeb Bush went after Marco Rubio, who he had helped, had a 17-year career in Florida, and then Rubio came back at him, questioning his motives, right back at him.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about it. What did you make of it?
It's the reason we are talking about Marco Rubio this morning, and I'm sure many people are. Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio did have a long relationship. They'd passed each other and dealt with each other a great deal when they were Florida officials. But it was always understood Jeb Bush was the older brother and Marco was the younger brother. They had their exchange in the debate the other night, and Marco did not walk out as junior. You know, Jeb went at him, and Marco swatted him away, and it was, I have a feeling we'll remember it as one of those big moments of the primary.
Jamelle, the comparisons to Barack Obama are happening. I mentioned to Senator Rubio that the Jeb Bush campaign called him the Republican Obama. Do you think it matters that he doesn't have any experience, or does a debate moment like that show leadership, and so lack of it in your career doesn't really matter?
I don't think it particularly matters. I think if you look at America's presidents, you'll be hard-pressed to draw any sort of linear connection between the amount of experience they had and how successful they were. I think it does pose a problem for Marco Rubio that in 2008, Republicans did make this very pointed argument about how Barack Obama had no experience, and that it continued for sort of the first term of his presidency. And Rubio, in a lot of ways, is adopting the arguments Obama used in 2008 to rebut the claim that he didn't have enough experience. And eventually, this is going to come to a head. Eventually, I think conservatives will say, wait a sec. Just 7 years ago, we said the exact opposite that Rubio is saying. Are we going to be consistent about this?
Right. You know, it's an interesting question about this. Jeb Bush has actual executive experience. Marco Rubio doesn't. But watching that exchange, which one would you rather see arguing with Putin in a room? You know, Marco Rubio showed that he can bring an argument strongly. Jeb Bush certainly doesn't have what Peggy very wisely called the merry aggression necessary to enter this kind of combat.
The experience thing is so flexible, though, John. Right. And if it works for the Republicans one cycle, then they're going to use it. If it works for the Dems the next, then they'll use it. It's all about circumstances, right? If your opponent doesn't have any experience, then that's going to be your argument. If your candidate does lack experience, then you're going to drop the argument. And so I think it's much more candidate specific. And the fact is that the Jeb folks have been saying for months now, well, once people learn about his experience as governor of this big state and all the conservative reforms that he did, they'll know he's not just a Bush name, that he has his own record. then voters will come around. Well, here we are, it's November 1st, and there's no indication whatsoever that in this primary, voters have much interest in experience and a record 10 years ago in Florida. Now, look, that could change with more voters paying closer attention when votes take place in Iowa and New Hampshire, but right now, they're much more interested in issues like strength and affect and sort of appearances than the records.
The one rule that stays campaign to campaign is they want a winner. Peggy,
yes.
what's your view on Jeb Bush? I mean, what is the state of the exclamation
Oh,
point?
one of the mysteries.
Is it still there?
Sagging, right?
I guess one of the mysteries of this primary year is why Jeb Bush didn't come out. Having as his signal statement, I have been a creative and thinking outside the box and original governor and a conservative, all those things plus a conservative of a major purple state. It is a surprise to me that he didn't make everybody care about his experience and his accomplishments. He really didn't. He let it go. Where is he now? He's got the wobblies. I mean, now and then candidates just get wobbly. He says that he is going to sort of do a John McCain, come back big, keep your eye on me, I grind it out. I'm a tough figure. We'll see where it goes. The thing I fear for him is that his super PAC is going to take its money and do negative dumping on other candidates. It worked in 2012 for Newt Gingrich against Mitt Romney, but it helped kill Romney. I think the Republican Party won't forgive it if it's done this time.
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that, Jamel. When I was talking to Marco Rubio, he said, I'm not going to attack anybody because in 2012, everybody attacked the nominee and that tore him down. That wasn't really about what Marco Rubio was going to do. It's what he didn't want done to him as he starts to look like he might be rising. Jamel,
that was a warning.
It was a very subtle warning, but it was definitely a warning. What about the rest of the field? What do you make of the Cruz and Trump and the rest of the Republican field?
I tend to think that the rest of the field is people are going to fall away, even Trump and Carson. I mean, you can already sort of see Trump get kind of tired of it as his numbers in the polls go down. He gets kind of upset and angry. I think Carson, likewise, there's no indication to me that Carson's a candidate that's going to endure past maybe Iowa. My hunch, and I was saying earlier that. So Marco Rubio is adopting a lot of Obama's arguments about his candidacy and about experience, but he's not really running Obama's 2008 campaign. It's very it's almost like John McCain's campaign, kind of trying to grind it out in a quiet way. Ted Cruz is running an Obama-style campaign, sort of focusing on merging grassroots money with big donor money, putting that money into infrastructure across the board, trying to develop a strategy that will gain him the most delegates coming out of Super Tuesday. So I would not be surprised to see Super Tuesday pass next year, and Cruz is among the ones left standing as a viable, a potential winner.
And when we talk about John McCain, we're talking about in 2008, his campaign was almost dead. He was carrying his own bags, and then he ascended back and had this phoenix-like rise again, which is good for a senator from Arizona to have a phoenix-like rise. Jonathan, do you buy this idea that in the Republican race there are two lanes, and there will be Ted Cruz at the head of the kind of Cruz, Trump, Carson lane, and then Rubio at the head of that lane?
Well, we actually have a story in the papers tomorrow that's now online about the sort of Cruz and Rubio relationship by Jason Horowitz. That's very good. Yeah, I can sort of see that coming here at some point. That Cruz and Rubio emerge sometime after Super Tuesday, perhaps, as kind of the final two candidates. I think right now that might even be the conventional wisdom. But like I said earlier, we've been wrong so many times. Why are Trump and Carson going to leave this race tomorrow? Obviously Carson has raised a lot of money. Trump has his own money. He hasn't spent much of it yet, but he has it there. So I'm not sure that they're going to get out. I was with Carson in Colorado after the debate, and then again in Memphis on Friday. You talk to folks at these events, and the most powerful stuff is he's not a politician. He's an outsider. It's a very strong force to the cycle, and don't discount that.
Yeah,
and people have been sitting around these tables for 6 months saying that any moment now, but I don't buy it anymore. This can go well into next year.
Jeffrey, I want to ask you one question about foreign policy. On the Republican side, talking to Marco Rubio about Syria, how do you see that conversation emerging in the Republican side, and especially with the president putting 50 special operations
Right. Well,
troops in?
the 50 troops is an incremental. It's an intensification of an existing strategy. Look, this all depends on events. If the president can keep this problem in a box, then it's fine. We stay where we are. If ISIS, look, what is the big variable here? The big variable is that ISIS or someone trained in ISIS-controlled territory does something outside of that territory, an act of terror, God forbid, an act of terrorism. Then we're in a new world, and that becomes obviously, among other things, a Republican a talking point, a big question in the Republican race. Right now, I think that Donald Trump has expressed it best. He expressed it to you best a couple of weeks ago. The feeling on the part of many Americans when he said that, what are we going to do? Have World War III over Syria? That's where it is right now, and it's staying in that spot. President Obama understands that as well. But again, if things change, if ISIS takes another huge city in Iraq or Syria, then we're also in another world.
Let me switch to the question of Paul Ryan, Peggy. You saw the interview. He's out now as the face of the Republican Party, or one of them until there's a nominee. What do you make of him as the face of the Republican Party?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things to be said about him, I think, is that it's nice to see quality rise. Everybody, Republicans and Democrats in this town, agrees this is a serious man who knows his brief, who has been an earnest politician and not a sleazeball or a slob. So that's good news. Yay.
You're really my stand.
Well tailored. Yeah, there we go.
Hooray for the nonsense.
Neither sleazeball nor slob.
But another thing that is an unseen part of his power at the moment, I think, is that he didn't want the job and had to be begged. When you finally give in over a matter of weeks and say, okay, I'll take your job, you've left people really invested in you. They don't want this not to work right now. They want it to work, which suggests to me he'll be able to have a little bit of a hand on some of his problematic characters in a way that Boehner wasn't able to.
Let me just,
at least for a while.
Short period of time we have left. Jamel, give me your take on where the Democratic race stands right now. Hillary Clinton had a pretty good week last week. Where do things stand now, do you think?
I think the broad picture is still that Hillary Clinton is the likely nominee. I think what might complicate that is that Bernie Sanders is running a very impressive operation in Iowa, has a lead in New Hampshire, and is running a great operation in New Hampshire as well. And I'm not sure that if he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, all of a sudden Hillary Clinton's knocked out. But I do think that Hillary Clinton cannot, even though she's ahead by 20, 25 points in national polling, I do not think that either race is something she can take for granted. I do not think she can simply count on maybe using South Carolina and Nevada as firewalls against Sanders' victories in Iowa and New Hampshire.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, all of you. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and Peggy is going to stay with us, and we'll talk to her about her new book when we come back. We're back with Peggy Noonan, who's got a new book out, The Time of Our Lives, a collection of her speeches and columns. So, Peggy, when you went back into the warehouse where some of this was and looked through, is there a through line through all of this work that you see?
I got to tell you, this is, I told your producer, Mary Hager, this is sort of 30 years in the making, the putting together of the manuscript. A through line, I was surprised by how the preoccupations of 30 years ago and 20 years ago are indeed the preoccupations of today, not only mine, but America's. The greatness game, presidential politics, the importance of history, the people who move us. Do you know what I mean? The theme, it all comes down to America, I guess.
One of the people that moved the country was Ronald Reagan, whom you worked for and who you worked on speeches with. One interesting thing you said is that those who worked for Reagan knew him even when he wasn't in the room. When I've talked to other staffers for other presidents, they've said that is the presidential difference, is that good presidents, you can intuit what they want even if they haven't talked to you about it.
Oh, that's so smart.
Tell us a little bit about that with Reagan.
Someone who worked, a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter once told me, I'm jealous of you when I was a speechwriter for Reagan. I said, why? He said, you knew what Reagan thought, you knew why he thought it, you knew how he'd put it, you knew where he'd come out. He said, I got to tell you, working for my president, Jimmy Carter, we never knew what he was going to say or where he was going to come out. If your philosophy is clear as president, your history is clear, your predilections, and how you speak is clear, your speechwriters are just going to be fine. They know you, they've studied you, they're with you.
And that goes for other parts of the government as well, in terms of people trying to figure out a president's will.
Yes, of course.
Tell us about the speech you worked on with Ronald Reagan after the Challenger disaster, and that notion of kind of that symbiotic relationship you had.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I actually begin the book with that, with a lecture that I gave to some college students who were studying history. I said, you're going to go into politics? Let me tell you about a moment in politics. My goodness, it was the day the Challenger blew up. We were not able to speak to the president, but we absolutely knew what he would think. And then somebody from the NSC who'd just spoken to him ran the notes of what he wanted to say, essentially, straight into us. And that was such a painful day. And, you know, it's 30 years ago, John. My goodness, time goes by. A painful day, but a deeply meaningful one.
That was the flight Christa McAuliffe was on, and there was that poem at the end of the speech where you had a sense that, or the line from the poem at the end of the speech, you had a sense he had read that poem too. You never talked to him about it.
It was a little gamble. I thought of this poem I had learned in 7th grade at the public schools in Massapequa, Long Island. I thought, this is the perfect ending for this speech, but we will never hear it if this is not a line from a poem that matters a lot to Ronald Reagan. And I watched it like everybody else. And indeed, he used that ending and called me afterwards the next day and said, how did you know I knew that poem? And I said, Mr. President, I did, and I took a chance.
Let me ask you about the writing process. Has it changed over all this time, or do you still sit down with a keyboard the same way you did with a typewriter?
Oh, for me personally, I sit down with a computer the way I did with a typewriter. It's a lot of
But does it come easier now? I mean, is it just the words
I'm shocked
flow
to tell
from...
you it doesn't. The words have never flown for me. It has always seemed like work, but very satisfying and delightful work. But still work. But you know, you can't complain. You're trying to describe to people what you see and what is true. And then when you think you got it right, you think, oh, right. Oh, right. And when you got it wrong, of course, you go hide under your desk.
And you listened to movie soundtracks while you're writing.
Yeah, I do. To movie music.
Yeah, because it's just...
Because other music would take me away from my work, but movie music is meant to help the story along. And what you're writing, when you're writing a column or an essay, you're writing a story. All right. You're writing this happened, and I think that, you know?
All right, well, Peggy, we look forward to more stories from you and to having you at this table. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much, John.
Thanks,
very
Peggy.
much.
And we'll be right back. That's all the time we have today. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.